Man, am I excited to share with you this video. Pivoting columns is something that I've always wondered how to get right in Power Query, and now I've finally figured it out. And I'm going to show you how to pivot all kinds of things for pivot column without making a mistake. For example, here we have this that kind of cycles through, if you like, where you've got client, date, income, etc. Then we've got two columns. We've got a one column solution where you just want them listed out in multiple columns. Then we've got more columns like this, and then suddenly, finally, a very, very large table which has duplicates and other issues. So I have spent ages using Power Query, and pivot columns is the one feature within the ribbon that I always got confused with how to do it. And then I came across an exercise and I finally researched everything that you need to know. And there is a little bit of code that you sometimes need to do to make this work, but I'm going to show you how to do all of these things using no code or low code. So my name is David Nye. I have tons of videos on Excel, PowerPoint, Google Sheets, Power BI, Teams, Zoom. I love Power Query and I love the new stuff as well. If you're using Tech of the Workplace, I'm covering on my channel. So subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. So let's get started with a basic example. So over here, I want to be able to list out the countries like this. Now, these two are the countries in Africa, these are in Americas, etc., etc. There might be a different number for each one. And here is a pivot table where I can get the total sales from this column by continent. This video is not about pivot tables. I have other videos I'll link to in the description about that, but this is about using Power Query. So in the data tab, you're going to choose from table array. So here I'm in Power Query. My data was running an Excel table, so it's going to show it to me like this. And we're going to look at pivot column here. Now, if you think about your pivot tables, you have rows, columns, and values. Here, you kind of have the same. You need to click on the thing that you want to appear in columns so that this will appear across the top, like that, by clicking on that one. If I click on this one, then these will appear across the top, which is not what you want. So, for example, I could click on this one, and I could then go to pivot column. But unlike pivot tables, where you choose the columns that you want and leave out the rest, it doesn't do that in Power Query. So I'm going to delete the ones I don't want. I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to choose pivot column, and I'm going to pivot the country one. That's the only one there. If I press OK, then by default, it will just tell me there are 4, 2, 2, 2, which is kind of what we see there. It does a count of them. But if I click on the clog and edit it, in advanced options, I have don't aggregate. And what I would hope to happen is that it would list them out, like we saw with Excel before, but it doesn't. It gives you an error. And we're going to look at kind of why that is and how to actually fix it to get it to do what you want. So I click close and load to, and I'm going to get it to load into an existing worksheet. Press OK. And it's going to load me with the errors. That's not very exciting. But I'm going to remove something, and then we're going to see something else happen. So I've currently got 2 countries in Europe. If I delete one of the countries in Europe, I'm going to remove that from the table. Then if I right-click and I refresh, actually Europe is not an error anymore. And that is because with pivot columns, it doesn't really work with duplicates. But let's go back into this one, and let's do essentially the aggregations, which is what pivot column can also do. So it does give me an error for all of these. And this error expression means essentially there are duplicates and it doesn't know what to do. So let's do it for numbers first. I'm going to delete this just to kind of cover the ground. And then I'm going to delete all the things that are not numbers, delete those. And then I'm going to pivot column. Doesn't work because I can't find the thing, but if I pivot sales, I can press OK. I get 2254, 364, etc. So the same numbers that I have here. I could, if I want to change the aggregation method, you have minimum, maximum, median that you can actually do in Excel pivot tables, average and sum, as well as count and count non-blank. But honestly, this isn't really why I use pivot column. It's never been a request of mine to do it this way because I would just do this in an Excel pivot table. So we're going to go through how to fix the error that I just made in 2 different ways. So I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to keep that. Let's go to the next example. So here I have data that looks like this, where I've got client, date, income, cost, profit, and then it cycles through all of them. We're going to go through a more advanced example that also sometimes adds an extra column, or in this case, it sometimes adds an extra column, and it also does reorder them-ish. So usually I have date, then income. Here, date is below, but client is still the first one for each section, if you like. So this is a fairly common data type. We're going to do this in Power Query, pivot columns, to end up with something that looks like this. Let me just make that a date so it's more familiar with what you want. And this is going to be what we're going to build. So I'm going to click on this, data from table arrange. I've called this cycle, as in your data is in a cycle. So the one that we want across the top is this one. So click on that, then pivot column, and then we have value. That's the only thing we want. And click on advanced options and don't aggregate. There we go. Now they're all giving me errors like we saw before. I'm going to exit out of that and we're going to fix it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to add columns and an index column. Then we're going to add another column, a conditional column. So I'm going to say if column equals client, then I'm going to say give me the index, otherwise give me null. So I know it's not immediately obvious why I'm adding these 2 columns, but this is how you do it to make it work. So now I can go to here and transform and fill down. So essentially it's grouping them that all the 0s are the Shelly client, all the 7s are the Pat client, etc. And now, if I go to pivot column, it won't break, but it still won't work very well. So click on that one, pivot the value. I always forget to click advanced options, don't aggregate, press OK. Now it hasn't given me any errors. In fact, I can click here and keep errors, no errors. But this isn't really what I wanted because I'm left with still 30 rows, which is the same amount of rows as I had initially. So that hasn't quite worked. I'm going to X out of that. What I need to do is delete my index column. And then if I do the same process, value and don't aggregate, now it works. Now I've got the data as I had it set out initially here. So it has worked, even though not every set of data has a notes, not everyone has an email, but and they are in a different sort order, it still gets the data in the right place. What is important, and what's super important, is that the first one in every group needs to be the client column. Otherwise it will not work. And that's why I'm calling this the sort of cycle process. So I'm going to close and load. I'm actually not loading my data with my settings because I'm going to go through a lot of them. All right, so let's go to 2 columns here. So this is a process that we're going to need to get from here to here. This is kind of like the country column, to be honest. We want to list them out. Note that we do have duplicates as well, but this method is able to handle those duplicates. I'm going to click on the table, data from table range. And now let's do the same process as before, but we're going to see why it unfortunately doesn't work. So index column, conditional column, if item equals travel. You can see it's because of the sort order. Then give index, otherwise null. So that is not going to be helpful because all of these are going to be 2s. So even if I do fill down and I delete this one, then click on here and pivot the type column with don't aggregate. Yes, remember to do that one. Then I get some of them working, but the other ones don't work. Now, if we actually analyze what's worked and what hasn't, we see that these 3 have worked, even though they are duplicates, and that is because they were listed out as 0, 1, 2. And then I pressed fill down, so all the others were 2, which is why they're in row number 2. Mojito has worked. That's because it's the only one in the drinks category, and the others have not worked. That is because there are multiple things that need to go into that category. And essentially, in order to display that in a cell, Power Query would need to do something like a comma delimited list, using something like text join if, which is a function I absolutely love using in Excel. I've got another video about that I made a few weeks before this one, because that is a quintessential tool, I think. But it's not able to do that within Power Query. So what we're going to need to do is another method to get this one to work. So I'm going to delete everything after the change type. You know, the change type I didn't need either. And now what we're going to do is group by. So in the transform tab still, we're going to group by. Group by is like the rows thing in a pivot table, if you like. I'm going to choose all rows, so this is don't aggregate, and then I'm going to say this is just all. It doesn't really matter what I put in there, actually, as you'll see. So what this can do that pivot columns can't is that it can have a table inside the cell. So this table has 3 rows, this one has 3, this one has 2, this one had 1, and that's why, because it had just one value, it could appear as I need it to be. Now, I need to edit this custom code a little bit, and over here, right before this underscore, I am going to add in a new function, table.add index column. So we are still adding the index column, press tab to lock that in, and the underscore, then we say what the new column name is. Again, this one doesn't matter too much, so this is going to be row number, and then I'm going to leave the rest blank, and then I'm going to press enter to lock that in, and then I'm going to show you what this is. So now it's given me row number 0, 1, 2. You could have specified if you wanted to start at 1 in the next input, but that's not necessary for this. So we do need to edit the code a little bit, and I'll show you why. If I try to expand it, it doesn't give me the index, annoyingly. So what I need to do is I need to go back into this one, and I'm actually just going to delete what it needs to categorize the values as, the fields as, and press enter. And now if I click here, now it has the row number. Because before I just was specifying how they should appear. If I don't specify at all, then they all appear like this. Press OK, and then I get all of them to appear like that. So now I'm basically where I need it to be. I actually don't need this all item one, so I'm going to go back and delete this, and I don't need the item. I'm just going to get the type and the row number. But now what is key is that they are cycling through 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. Even if there are different numbers, that is still able to do it. Which means now that this row number is going to appear 1, 2, 3, 4. It's actually 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but more or less the same. So if I click on this one and I go to pivot column, and I choose type in advanced options, don't aggregate, it works. There you go. Now I have essentially what I was hoping to do. Flight, the 3 flights, these 3, even though there's duplicates, that still works. Perfect. So now I'm going to close and load. Now the next one is actually a combination of the 2 methods. So here I've got just one column and I want, for example, lists of 4. It doesn't need to be in any particular order. I'm going to have lists of like 6 or 10 or something. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to go data from table range. Now, as we saw in earlier examples, we need to have, before we unpivot, we need to have 3 columns. We need to have one column, which is going to be going across the top, which is what the column we want to pivot. We need one column, which is the row number, and we need then the values that go inside each of them. So back in this one, I'm going to choose add column and then index column, and then I'm going to do column for examples. And I love this for banding. I'm going to put 0 to 6, for example, 0 to 7. Then it will list it to 7 until it gets to there, and then it starts at these ones. This is really, really great because you can just press OK, and it does it like that in regular segments. And now I don't really need this one, so I can delete this one, but I do need to do the grouping to get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then toggle again. So I need to go to transform, group by, and I'm going to say all rows. Doesn't matter what I call it, really. And then here I can see all of the rows. There is a uniform number in each one, which we didn't get in the last example. But then over here, I need to do my custom code, table.add index column, open my brackets, comma, and then the name is going to be row number. Again, it doesn't matter what you call it, close your brackets, comma, to go back to the table.group thing. And then as we did before, we need to delete this extra bit. And then we get that. And as you can see here, I've got the row number, so I can expand it out. I don't need the range, and I don't need to use the original name. And there you go. Now I have the 3 columns that I need. This is going to be across the top. This is going to be in the values, and this is going to be the row numbers. So next up, I need to click on this one, and then I need to go to pivot column, pivot country, advanced, don't aggregate, press OK. And there we go. Now I don't need this one, so I can delete that column. And I actually don't want it to say 0 to 7, so I'm going to use headers as first row, and then I'm going to remove the top 1 row. Perfect. And then I can close and load. Now, as we can see so far, we do need to get to a situation where we have 3 columns, but it doesn't have to be 3. It can also work with 4 columns. For example, here, or as many columns as you need to, as we'll see later on in a much bigger example. So here I have item, car, month, and sponsor, and I want it to appear like this, so that every time Charlie in October, for each of these, Joey in October, and then each of those in November as well for each combination. Some of them will be blank, some of them are errors, as we'll see, but this is the one we're going to kind of explore. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to choose from table arrange. So I did this one already before, and if I show you the output, I do have some errors, and that is because there were some duplicates there. If I change this to be a count, then it works for nulls, it works for ones, but it doesn't work for anything above 1. So 2s and 3s mean that there are duplicates in the rows. So essentially, if I select all the things that are going to go into the unpivot, and I choose to merge columns, then if I keep duplicates, this needs to be empty, otherwise this will not work. As we can see, it's broken for accommodation, for travel, for Charlie, etc. And this will coincide with what is broken in these cells, the 3s and the 2s. So we're going to look at one final example, because that kind of solves this problem, but just in a more advanced method. So the next example, this is actually the one that made me learn all of this, because this is what I had to do, where I've got different countries and the lockdown values and how long their COVID lockdowns were, etc., etc. that I was doing for some analysis. So I'm going to select this data. I'm going to go from table arrange. I have got the 3 columns, and if I do it immediately, I assumed it should work quite well. So click on attribute and go to transform and pivot columns, and then I'm going to unpivot the value, press OK, and I want rows for each country. So go back, and I'm going to choose don't aggregate. And then here I'm going to keep errors. I love doing that just to check. I have got some errors. I've got some errors, Panama National, Philippines National, etc., etc. And all of these for level are errors as well. So essentially, I have got duplicates. And so this isn't going to work. But fortunately, if I undo this, the method that is with the grouping, that does actually work for it. So from here, I'm going to choose group by, and I'm going to choose all rows, press OK, and then I'm going to change the thing again, and then I'm going to click in the formula bar, and pretty much the same as before, table.add index column, and I'm going to open my brackets, click the delete button, and I'm going to say that is the table, and then I want to have the column named row number, close my brackets, comma, type table, perfect, and then close your brackets there. By the way, there are other operations to do fuzzy grouping. It's kind of like fuzzy matching. I have another video where I do that, or I do an add cluster column, which is also really useful. But now I have it, and usually it goes through. But for the few exceptions where I do have duplicates, it is kind of fixing them using this. So now here I can expand, and I don't need the location. I don't need to add that. So I'm going to keep everything else. And now I'm going to click on attribute. I'm going to pivot by the value. The row number is going to stay as the row number, and I'm going to have don't aggregate. Press OK. Delete the row number. And now if I keep errors, it's error-free, which is fantastic. So that's the end of this very comprehensive video, but I hope you've enjoyed it because, as I said, for years I've been perplexed about this pivot column in Power Query, and now I'm so satisfied that I managed to fix it. And I wanted to share with you, and if you want a copy of this file, then leave me a comment. If you like this video, then I've been David Benheim, and I release weekly videos on Excel, Power BI, Power Query, Google Sheets, Zoom Teams, using tech of the workplace I'm covering on my channel. Oh, and of course you can use all of these same tricks in Power BI because Power Query is exactly the same. Thanks for watching.